So as you're sharing your location, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Heather Vaughn. I lead educational outreach at the Annette Strauss Institute and lecture in the Moody College of Communication at the University of Texas at Austin. Celebrating 20 years, the Annette Strauss Institute for Civic Life was founded to cultivate active citizens through applied research, education, and outreach programming. We believe that citizens are made, not born, and commit to serving to this mission through young people, civic discovery, and civil dialogue. So you may find yourself wondering, what is Civic Saturday? It is a place for us to build community by connecting with others and ourselves, finding ways to be involved, and practicing habits to be active members of society. Every community that you are part of, whether that's your campus, your neighborhood, your city, this Civic Saturday group, every community of yours needs the talents and gifts that only you can contribute. We build our community through traditions. For Civic Saturday, that means we will have a civic text and theme that will be explored through performing arts, discussions, and student-led content. We will be asking for your feedback for future themes, so please let us know what you want to see. Now, let's take a moment to focus. If you are willing, please take a deep breath in, hold, release. Let's do that one more time. Deep breath in. Hold. Release. Now, I invite you to close your eyes to listen to our civic text from John Lewis, written July 17th and published July 30th for his funeral. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe, because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love, and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. As we continue through Civic Saturday, I want you to think about how you are listening, learning, and advocating for yourself and others, and how history plays into that. Big ideas have historically emerged from outside the government, among individuals who envisioned a different future from the times they were living in. So I encourage you to take stock of your power. What are you doing to nurture, enhance, and circulate that power for the greater good? After the opening panel, we will hear from Iggy, Mwela, and André Bradford from Cometry. They exemplify the power of laughter and spoken word to spark deep reflection as the best medicine for everyday life, especially in today's climate. You'll also hear from student activists Kenard Jones and Elizabeth Kofur that will give you tangible ideas for implementation. Now, I'd like to welcome our next guest to the program, our esteemed panelists, Amber Coleman-Mortley, Dr. Eric and Dr. Minkah Makalani. Please introduce yourself to our audience. Who would like to start us off?
I can go first. Hello, everyone. My name is Amber Coleman-Mortley. I'm coming to you guys from the East Coast. So it's afternoon for me, morning for you. I am the Director of Social Engagement at iCivics. We are a nonprofit that makes video games and teacher resources in civic education. I'm also a parent blogger at Mom of All Capes, and I run a podcast with my 3 daughters, Let's K-12 Better.
Great, thank you. Can I get Dr. McDaniel to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Eric McDaniel. I'm a professor in the Department of Government. I've been here at the University of Texas for 16 years. My research focuses on religion and politics, racial and ethnic politics, and health policy. I'm currently working on one project that looks at religious nationalism. Another project examines the role of the social and prosperity gospels in understanding Black and religious efforts. Black religious efforts and political efforts. So it's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you today about this topic.
Thank you. And then Dr. Minkah Makalani, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good late morning, afternoon, everyone. Minkah Makalani, I am the director of the John L. Warfield Center for African and African American Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, as well as associate professor of African and African Diaspora Studies at UT. I've been here for about a little over 8 years, and I work on Black intellectual history, political thought, social movements, and questions around art, democracy, and political efficacy. I am currently, I have a book that's on early 20th century Black radicals who became some of the first members of any communist party in the world, and how through those connections they built anti-racist and anti-colonial movements that both worked within and then were independent of global communist movement. Currently, I'm working on 2 pieces. One is looking at the question of political imagination and what is unimaginable, and how the arts and political movements help us approach things that we could not imagine or that we never would think as possible. And the other is a history of Trinidadian radical intellectual C.L.R. James, who spends about 25 years in the US and England, and then in 1958 returns to Trinidad to work on independence from the British Empire and West Indies Federation.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. So I'd like to start out asking the panel, how would you describe the connections that you see between the action and movements today and those that have happened in history? Whoever wants to start.
I guess I'll go first. You see, the way I think about it is you see kind of a lot of similar aspects of this. I think one of the things that I always tell my students when I'm talking about social movements or even the civil rights movement, and even comparing it to today, is that it's not that, one day Black people in the South woke up and said, Jim Crow is horrible, we need to do something about it. It's the issue that they knew it was horrible, but they didn't think they could do anything about it. And I think what you're seeing right now is, again, Professor Makalani talked about the study of efficacy. You're seeing a higher level of efficacy where people feel like, no, there is something we can do about this. And usually what happens is a number of things come together, which provides an opening for a social movement. And I think the same thing that are going on now, where you're seeing kind of a lot of things converge at one place, provides that opportunity where people say, no, there is something that we can do. There is some action that we can take. And I think one of the key things about this is a sense of efficacy. A lot of people will recognize there's something wrong, but is there anything we can do about it? And I think one of the major changes is this belief that something can be done about the situation. And this is how you can link the civil rights movement to today, or even movements of the Black anti-racist movements of the past today, is this increased sense of efficacy.
Yeah, I would definitely add on that this moment in time is one small step, or large, in a long history of steps toward justice and holding our constitution and our founding documents accountable, and ensuring that everyone is experiencing justice in an equitable way. So, you know, this isn't a surprise moment. This is just, again, like one additional step in the long story of how do we make sure that the Constitution is manifesting as we want it to.
I would, can you guys hear me? Okay. I would add to what has been said by saying that I think there's a very long history, a much longer history of Black political struggle around questions of rights, equitable treatment, basic humanity that has spanned the past 5 centuries since those first Africans were captured and brought to both Europe and the Americas. And we see this consistently across time, and particularly over the past century or so. Not only, but I think what we see is kind of a crescendo, but this is, I think, we're at a moment where we're breaking a limit, where we're moving beyond merely trying to have equitable treatment, merely trying to have rights as rights are questions of justice, are questions of freedom, are articulated and constituted in the prevailing order. I think particularly since 2014 with the inauguration of the Black Lives Matter movement, and how that was thought about, how people in different communities organized around it, how that has helped to transform how scholars and intellectuals talk about these questions. I think we're now at this moment that is kind of an amplification of some of the more critical antagonisms of previous eras in this past century, at least. And that is, when we get at the core of what was originally talked about with Black Lives Matter, that was, how do we make an ethical claim about those lives that are seen as most outside of the social political order being valuable, not merely as a moral question, but as an ethical political question. And I think one of the things to draw out that's kind of amplified with this moment is that when Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opa Tamati made that statement, Black Lives Matter, they're making it because as a political and ethical reality, they don't matter juridically, not morally, but they don't matter as a matter of custom, as a matter of practice of law, and really as liberal democracy is constituted in the United States. And I think now we're seeing this confrontation between reaching the limits of what the current order can achieve and these demands that push us to go beyond what we can think of and what we can conceptualize as a possibility. And so I think that's what's really unique about this moment. And it's not to say that everything is about moving beyond the current order, but I think that's one of the critical things to point out, is that we are at a moment where we are asking questions that are existential to our social political reality.
Yes, I love that. And I think this is a great segue to talk about with you, Amber, iCivics. Based on all the movements that are happening right now, especially Black Lives Matter, have you seen a renewed interest in civics for the K-12 community? And if so, is there another moment in time where you saw this kind of spike in interest? And where do you see this energy going?
Yeah, so, you know, I will speak specifically to the civic education space and contemporarily, like within the last couple years. So, you know, 2016, we definitely saw, leading up to the 2016 election, we saw a spike for iCivics on our site, where we had, over 6 million users come to our site, searching for resources, searching for answers to the various questions that students are bringing into the classroom, searching for ways to teach students about how our government should work. So that would be a previous, like up until this moment, we can see, how the impeachment has impacted the lives of students and the questions that they're bringing to the classroom for educators to grapple with. And then obviously the undercurrent of the murders of Black men and women at the hands of the police. Like, how do we discuss these topics, and how do we discuss what would seem to be controversial issues and issues of survival, right, in classrooms between teachers and students. So we've seen interest on our site specifically around these moments in time. And I think that our resources do a pretty good job of addressing and assisting educators in their journey to inform our students. We are obviously doing internal work to make sure that we're addressing issues of equity within our own curriculum and figuring out how do we, as an organization, as a leader in this space, ensure that we are speaking to racial justice issues, as well as in the sphere of equity issues. Within our CivX Now coalition, the coalition that we lead, it has over 120 organizations that have signed on for high quality civic education standards. We're seeing this push for states to adopt civic education standards that are high quality and comprehensive. So you have states like Florida, who have a long-standing civic mandate. We have states that, like Massachusetts and Illinois and others, that are pursuing state policy to ensure that every student that graduates receives some sort of civics before they leave. Obviously, civics is not the only answer to the many questions that are being posed in today's society about how do we restructure society, or how do we evolve society, or how do we make life between humans better, right? But civics touches every aspect of human engagement, right? The way that we engage with each other, our civil discourse, the way that we respect the voices of others that we do not agree with, right? We need to train students how to have these types of skills. And civic education is that place to do that. So in addition to ensuring that the civic education that students receive, it's not just empowerment civics just for the sake of pushing students out the door to run against an impenetrable wall. We want to make sure that we're addressing the civic ecosystems like government, the school, the home, to ensure that students are experiencing democracy in every single space in which they engage with, that their voices are heard, and that their civic passions and pursuits are able to flourish and thrive. So those are the kinds of things that we're grappling with at iCivics and with the Civic Now Coalition. And that's kind of where we are in this moment.
Great. I feel like we might want to continue the conversation of Black Lives Matter with you, Dr. Makalani. Can you tell us about, you had an article, Black Lives Matter and the Limits of Formal Black Politics, the limitations of a liberal democratic state following the protests in Ferguson that were sparked by the killing of Michael Brown. Do you believe that this argument still holds true in 2020?
Yes, I do. And the argument that I was making was essentially that within the context of liberal democracy, formal kind of electoral liberal Black politics operates by assuming that the prevailing order is just and works properly. And so it's the best means for us to gain redress. So whether it be through protests or through formal electoral politics, the objective is to improve and enhance the current system. And in that article, I was arguing that the killing of Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, and others at that time, Freddie Gray was in Baltimore, and the response from the Black Lives Matter protests and movement that grew out of it did not accept formal politics as the only way to address racial violence, racial oppression, what have you. And that ultimately liberal politics or liberal democracy is incapable of giving an adequate form of redress. And I think more than anything, the past 3.5 years of Trump's presidency, and then the response of the current protests, demonstrates even more than ever the limitations and the impossibility of having something along the lines of racial equality within the normal function of democratic system, a liberal democratic system. That doesn't mean that people don't still engage and that it isn't a good arena for political struggle or for struggle in the formal political realm. But I think ultimately this is showing us that there are certain limitations that will never achieve something like equality. And I think even the inability to realize John Lewis's his legacy to have a voting rights legislation passed again is a demonstration of the inability of limitations of the current order.
Definitely, and I think we'll see that as a thread of discussion that we're having, and I felt like even just seeing what our student athletes are doing here at UT as an example, and that makes me want to go back to you, Amber, because one of your most recent posts on Mom of All Capes is on the role that parents and coaches play in building more civically minded student athletes. Do you foresee the stadium and the arena as a continued space for civic engagement and social activism?
Yes, I do. As a former athlete, I value what athletics can bring to the lives of students. I will say that democracy is definitely messy, but people have to engage in that experience in order for it to work. So I see that the space for athletics, the field, the court, these are spaces that are civic spaces, right? Anywhere where humans engage with each other, they are spaces in which civics is happening, which conversations are happening, in which compromises are happening, and people are learning about give and take, learning how to engage with each other, and learning how to make sure that we make space for voices that aren't heard. I would say that coaches have a responsibility to ensuring that their athletes can safely speak to the needs and the issues that concern them most. There has been a long history of muting Black athletic voices. We're still experiencing that today when you look at professional athletes in the ways that, the leagues either support them or do not, or reluctantly support them when the dollar signs, begin to walk out the door. So, this is a moment in time where we need to evaluate, right? How do we lift up student voice? How do we ensure that our students feel whole and complete? How do we make sure that athletes, though they might be on scholarship, are not feeling as if they're being used or controlled in a way in which their humanity is, or we're dehumanizing them? So, in a podcast episode, we interviewed a former Division I athlete, and we talked about the ways in which she experienced, coaches muting athletes on teams, coaches, having policies that, again, dehumanize students. And so we want to make sure that, wherever we are, our student athletes are experiencing democracy in those spaces. There's not just bodies, they are minds, and those minds have a lot to say. And they know the history, and they are connected to what has happened in the past. They are aware.
Agreed, and we do see a lot of change that happens when our athletes speak up, for sure. And we're seeing that with coaches, and we've seen that in some state changes this spring as well. I'd like to switch gears to another realm kind of outside of the government type of organizing, and that would be religious organizing. So Dr. McDaniel, I'd like you to touch upon this. Following the killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, a new wave of civic action and social consciousness has been seen in the streets. We're witnessing that energy as it makes its way to state houses. Could you shed light on where you see religious organizations fall in the movement from civic activism to cultural change in 2020?
So religious institutions play an interesting role. Historically, they can support the status quo. And this has been one of the major complaints of religious institutions. And this is where you've seen a lot of the activists associated with Black Lives Matter not really want to work with the Black church because the Black church has, in many ways, stymied their activities or been more so supportive of the status quo that they've undercut the message that Black Lives Matter wants to put forward. And if you look at the civil rights movement, one of the strongest critiques that King received was from other Black ministers. And so you even see the split of the National Baptist Convention over this, over his level of political activism. But there is something about the religious experience in general, which can play a role in fostering civic activity. We know that people who attend church are more likely to turn out to vote, and are more likely to be politically engaged. We also know that people who receive messages about being to be actively involved in politics at their church are more likely to engage. So it's not just that going to church is important, but going to a church that tells you to be engaged is important. And this is important no matter what the race. But we find that it's actually more important for African Americans, and that the religious context in which you exist can influence your level of political participation. So I have some work with Professor Todd Shaw at the University of South Carolina, which has demonstrated that Black members of the LGBTQ community who attend church and feel accepted within their sexual identity are more likely to engage than those who are not. And so these interactions you have in the church matters. And I think what we're seeing with the current movement is that many churches are maybe kind of slow to move. Many religious leaders are slow to move. Now, an example of someone who's been actively engaged would be William Barber in North Carolina with a Moral Mondays protest. And I think churches now are realizing, oh, there's something that we need to do. And it's very similar to what we saw, throughout the history, as Professor Makalani pointed out, since Blacks first arrived in England and in the colonies and in Latin America, and religion has become part of their life. Religion has played a role in mobilizing. It has also played a role in keeping them kind of quiet. And I think now what we're seeing is kind of an awakening or a reawakening of the Black church, where they're realizing that the old norms aren't going to work. And so just as King had to engage in consciousness raising within the Black church, you're seeing the same thing going on now, where individuals who may have been considered radical 5 years ago, such as James Cone with Black liberation theology, are now being seen as, no, these are the individuals who need to speak in this moment, in this time. So I do believe that religion is coming. I don't think they're not in the forefront as they were 50, 60 years ago. And I think because what the new movement is very much of the need for the church is not as strong today as it was in the past, but also I think the message they have is so broad that the church in many ways limited. However, you are seeing churches that engage in liberation theology and are kind of a broader social gospel are the ones that are more equipped to handle this time.
And I guess to kind of continue that, have you seen religious ideologies that are bubbling up to the surface because of all these social movements in 2020?
Yes, and you're seeing this not just within the Black context, but also outside of this. And so one of the things you're seeing is there's kind of a rising idea of a Black liberation theology, or this idea that to truly be a Christian, to truly be religious, means to side with the oppressed. and that to work for the liberation, that the work for the liberation of blacks and the downtrodden is to work for true salvation. And it is coming into direct conflict with what's commonly referred to in the U.S. as kind of a Christian nationalism, where this idea of the U.S. as a Christian nation, this idea of the U.S. has this permanent innocence, and that any complaint or any critique of that is clearly demonic or sinful. And so questioning the nation's history of slavery is working against God's will. So a great example of this, of kind of this Christian nationalism being played out, is kind of flipping through the internet. You know, these ads will just automatically pop up. One ad popped up, you know, this is being sent to all true Americans, and it was for a T-shirt. And the T-shirt said, you know, we stand for the flag and kneel for the cross. But this right here invokes this idea of Christian nationalism. And what we understand is Christian nationalism is highly racialized. And that when we're finding that when whites adhere to Christian nationalism, there's a very strong, you know, the nation comes first, don't question any of these things, we are a perfect nation. However, on the part of African Americans, when they embrace it, it's more of a, no, we need to be humble. This is an ideal we need to work towards. So if we say we are a Christian nation, we must be doing this. And so you're finding direct conflicts between how people are identifying what it means to be a good Christian. And this is kind of a white-black conflict which has existed for centuries. And we just want to think about this in terms of the American Christian context. But even within the Black religious context, we're running into problems such as the growth of the prosperity gospel versus the social gospel. The social gospel you would associate with King in the civil rights movement, but the prosperity gospel you associate more with mega churches, like Creflo Dollar, and they seem to become in direct conflict. What does this mean? Can the message of the prosperity gospel, which has grown over the past several decades, really survive in a time such as this? Can an argument that, you know, God rewards the faithful givers, and, you know, as long as you tithe and show this commitment, God will reward you, cannot really survive in the face of clear systematic problems? And I think, you know, this is a tug of war, or kind of an internal struggle that you'll see within the Black religious context, specifically the Black Christian religious context, along with this broader conflict you're seeing between kind of white Christian nationalists and Black Christian nationalists, if you think about this in the larger American Christian context. And we're really seeing just the complexities of religion, and that religion and religious outlooks are really coming out into the forefront right now, and we're seeing this direct clash. And this is promoting individuals to mobilize, to combat what they see as the devaluing of Black lives, and then also a counterattack for those who believe that that everything is fine, and that the Black Lives Matter movement is really something to undermine the nation.
Thank you for that. I really think there's so much to explore, and so I appreciate you being able to make it as concise for our audience as you can. We have so many protests that are happening every weekend, especially here in Austin, I've noticed. So, Dr. Makalani, do you think significant inroads and progress have been made in our nation so that the requests of these protesters are being heard directly?
Yes, I think as an empirical point, and in any number of measures, we have to recognize that there's been substantial change from, say, 1619, if we look at the 1619 project, up until today. But I want to be careful in that to talk about how Black people have changed the country. And I think it's undeniable that to the extent that democracy functions equitably in the United States is a consequence of Black political struggle over the past 2 centuries. But the other side of that is the response of those in power. And in particular, if we're looking at how white supremacy works as kind of the dominant political order, it's changed as well. And so what we're seeing is a response to kind of the most dynamic period of political organizing since slavery, and people trying to readjust how they engage in political activism, how they engage both the state and state actors, but how they pursue alternatives and how they pursue questions of progress outside of merely in conversation with state actors. And so I think that's one of the more interesting things in this moment, is that we can have quote unquote progress within the dominant order, but are there limitations to that, and what does that actually mean? And one of the questions that's come up, at least since the 1970s, but definitely in the past 10 years, is if we continue to make progress, but Black people are continuing to be victims of racial violence, Black people are still killed at will, if Black women are still subject to racialized sexual violence, et cetera, the treatment of Black, queer, trans, and gender non-conforming folks. What is progress? What are we actually trying to measure by saying we've had progress? And I think that's one of those questions that really get at the root of what is it that we're after in this moment? And I think it's a range of things, but I think that's one of the critical questions to kind of take up. And just maybe to add on to a bit of Dr. McDaniel's answer, part of what I think makes this period unique is that there's been a long history of a range of Black religious and spiritual practices that have had political valences. So if we think about the structure of the United States, we are in Texas and the West because of the actions of those enslaved in what is now Haiti, and that prompting a set of events that led to the Louisiana Purchase. But part of the organizing vehicle for that was African religious practices and cosmological understanding of themselves in the world, what we might now call Vodun, and the proliferation of Black Islamic practices and other kinds of spiritual practices, particularly in the past 50 years. So I think, again, what that gets at, to Dr. McDaniel's point, is that this not only a conflict and these debates within, say, Black Christianity, but Black spiritual practices and political practices more broadly that are asking these very profound questions about what does it mean to exist in a society that has always been unequal, that has always been hierarchical, and that doesn't show any sign of realizing true equality.
Yes, yes, yes. I think, number one, we are so grateful to have such great academics to speak with our audience. I'd like to see if, I know that your research doesn't mean that you're necessarily consider yourself an activist yourself, but because we have a lot of student activists or educators that are wanting to really promote how to get involved in movements in your community, I'd love it if each of you would be willing to leave one piece of advice for, you know, how to work as a student activist.
I'll offer some, because I was a student activist when I was an undergraduate, and I think that there are a range of ways that you can become politically active, and it doesn't have to be, like, in other words, I guess another way to say what I'm trying to get at is there are a number of ways to be politically active, and on your campus or in your very local community is a very legitimate realm of political activism. And it's also a realm that can help give a student who may not have certain skills a proving ground where they can develop skills as an organizer. They can learn what it means to organize, what's the difference between organizing and a mass protest, how do you galvanize people. I think college campuses are also really important arenas for thinking about the relationship between institutions of higher education and the communities in which they exist. So what is the town-gown relationship? How do people on a campus, in particular, how do Black people on a campus relate to Black people in the community, particularly as with Austin, there is a history of an antagonistic relationship between the university and that local Black community, especially if those institutions facilitate the decline and gentrification of those Black communities. And so those become realms of activism as well.
I would add on that, it's just really important to learn the processes for getting the job done, because obviously we are in an imperfect system, but in order to make immediate change, we need to understand how those systems impact our lives, how those systems oppress our lives, how those systems can improve our lives and the lives of others around us. So, I would implore any student activist or any social justice warrior to just understand the functioning of government and how it works and does not work in the lives of the people around you and as well as yourself. And then figure out the avenues for fixing those problems, and then figure out, can I use this system to make broader, more existential change, right? Like if we want to have these high level discussions and push the needle on making society different, we need to understand how society is already broken down. And so I really would implore student activists to understand how government and politics works, and then push to make the changes that they want to see, or create a completely new system of functioning that's best for all people.
And I fully agree with everything that's being said here. I think these are great ideas. I guess the one thing I would add is, one thing my student activists understand is that you're not the first ones to do this. And there is something that you can learn from alumni, from people who've done this in the past. And it's interesting to find out that a lot of the people that you think are conservative or didn't do much were actually student activists when they were younger. So the example I give is my mother. Small, meek woman, goes to church. She's at church every Sunday, very humble, and I mentioned that, oh, that's right, you went to Bennett, which is in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is, she showed up there 4 years after the Greensboro 4, tried to desegregate the lunch counters at Walgreens. And she's like, oh yeah, we heard a lot about them. I mean, I was involved in that and in a lot of student activism. I was even tear gassed once. And this came as a shock to me, finding out, in my mid-40s, that my mother, when she was, in her teens, was getting tear gassed because she was out there protesting. And I think there is something to learn about the people who've been there before that can help you, as Professor Makalani pointed out, about understanding just the various things you need to work with. And I do think what Professor Makalani pointed out about, the students in many ways are transplants. They're new to the area and they want to do something, but are they actually representing the needs of the people who are here? And I would, I think one of the people to talk to, we'll talk to many of the Texas exes, especially those who were here in the 60s and 70s, who helped desegregate, the campus, but also desegregate Austin. And I think by understanding their history and the things they had to face, but also what they had to do to get people organized, I think is good to understand that, you're not starting from scratch. There actually is a recipe out there. People have done this before. And if you talk to them, that they can give you ideas and let you know, what worked, what didn't work, and prevent you from making mistakes that they regret.
I really appreciate those ideas, because I do think students that want to blaze a trail, there might already be a trail there. And so look back on the trail and see who's there that can help you along, because you don't have to be the first person to start things. I do want to open it to audience questions. I do already have one for you, Amber. What steps might you suggest for K-12 teachers in engaging students in civic actions beyond their civics education this year in light of the pandemic? That is, how do we balance the incredible need for social justice and the precautions around COVID-19?
Yeah, so first, I would highly recommend any teacher to go on to start their own anti-racism journey, just to understand how the history of the United States and how our government has impacted like communities thus far, right? So that's number one. Number two, you know, if you are in a blended environment, whether you are in face-to-face or whether you're completely online, there are opportunities to allow students to pursue their civic interest, to pursue social justice work through projects, right? Like bring in deeper questions about the community and what students are experiencing into the classroom. Bring current events into the classroom. Do not shy away from teaching what people would call controversial issues, because many of those controversial issues are issues of survival for most people, right? So we don't want to shy away from having class discussions. I would also say expand histories and narratives so that they are accurate and complete. We want to make sure that students are hearing from a variety of voices. So hopefully these are a few just quick examples for K-12 educators to get started. iCivics does have some resources, and also my DMs are always open for more like, you know, to the letter, like what you should do.
Definitely. We have links in our resources on the Annette Strauss K-12 page for iCivics, and we also have things for our Speak Up, Speak Out K-12 programming that's project-based to help you do it online this year. Other questions? I don't see any coming in. Oh, here we do. What is your advice on making sure protests and movements translate into votes? That's a great question. Who would like to answer that?
I guess I can start with that. I think the passing of John Lewis is kind of an important thing to make note of, because if we think of the civil rights movement as being kind of several strategies of how to gain success, we can think of John Lewis as Representative John Lewis as straddling the nonviolent direct action approach and the political approach, in the sense that he started off with the protests to get the right to vote, and then from there using that. I think one of the difficulties a lot of people have is that there is this disconnect between protest and politics, and that sometimes protest and politics can work hand in hand. So sometimes you need to go to vote in order to get the people that you want in, but you need to protest to make sure the people that you did vote in and those that you didn't vote in are aware of what's going on. And voting is an information signal to elected officials, but so is protest. And I think what happens with a lot of people is that they will vote, but then they won't protest. And you know, the issue is getting somebody in the office is really the easy part. Getting the policies through is the hard part. And I think, you know, this is, looking at the primary example of this is what we saw in 2008 with the election of President Obama. People are like, okay, Obama's elected, we're great. It's like, well, no, getting him in was the easy part. Getting all the changes that you want to see is the hard part. I think that's where people need to understand that protest and voting go hand in hand. That if you're doing one, you need to do the other. That if you're opposed to this policy, you protest, and then you make sure you vote to get people in to get rid of that policy. But then you also remain protesting. You also remain active to make sure that when they're in, they do it. And so I see protest and voting going hand in hand. That you don't do one without the other. You have to kind of bring them in, make sure you stay on top of the elected officials to make them aware this is what you want. Not just when you go to the voting booth, but once you leave the voting booth and they're there, they know exactly what you want, and that they will stay focused on the goals you want them to achieve.
Yes, we have to definitely keep our officials accountable to what we've asked for. I think we've got one final question, and it's a big one. What are your thoughts on the use of social media by our youth to call out injustice in the educational system? For many youth, this is their medium. What about when administrators are not embracing this medium because they don't like the public calling out? Community reaction by those of privilege, not recognizing the experiences of the marginalized and wanting to keep the status quo.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in real quick and leave space for others if they want to answer. But we ran a youth fellowship this year where students leveraged social media to talk about equity in civic education. Some of the equity issues, obviously, our schools are not functioning as democratic spaces. You know, I think social media is a beautiful space. Obviously, we see with Black Lives Matter and Me Too and, you know, all the other hashtags that pop up. Social media is a connector. I think that educators can do a lot better job of allowing students to connect with others across the country who are experiencing the same pain points. You know, our students they came from about 12 states in Puerto Rico, you know, they walked away from this experience learning, you know, hey, I'm in Illinois and we have great civic education, but people in Puerto Rico do not. You know, how can I build coalitions across, you know, hundreds of miles to support students elsewhere? And so, you know, I think that educators should embrace social media as a learning, project-based learning space. You know, allow students to just have that opportunity to express themselves on social media. Obviously, it can go any number of ways, but I think that that's just a part of life, right? So we have definitely seen an extremely large benefit of social media as a social justice platform, and I would highly encourage schools to begin to adopt practices that allow students to speak out on social media.
I would add to that by saying that I think what we're seeing is the dynamism in organizers and how they approach various tools, various mediums that they have. And so my first book was in the 1920s and 30s, and magazines and newspapers were critical to how different people in different places, be it Chicago, New York, Tulsa, London, France, they were reading what each other wrote, they were reading about their activities. And I think that social media functions in that same way. And you know, whether it's true or not, the idea that TikTok helped undermine the Trump Tulsa rally, I think is really suggestive. I have a 10-year-old daughter who will be 11 in a week, and I wanted to get her a phone so she could have TikTok all the time. I didn't do that, but it just showed how younger generations, younger people are able to use different media that they're facile with in unique and dynamic ways. But I think it also has to be something that is used tactfully, strategically, so that we don't fall into the illusion that social media is organizing itself. That's one facet of organizing. And also that social media, if that is the sole arena, that can allow those who you are trying to pressure, who you are trying to challenge their power, that they can use that to actually your detriment. And we see that also in the way that the government is using social media to surveil activists and people who are participating in activism. So it's something that we have to be thoughtful about how they're using and not assume that it in and of itself is organizing.
I guess as what I could add to that is the making things public is really how you're able to get pressure. I think we talk about the civil rights movement, but one of the things that allowed the civil rights movement to be successful was that the racial problems in the US were known globally. And so now there was global pressure on the US to respond to this. You can't come off of World War II fighting the Nazis and supporting democracy, to go into the Cold War, talking about the evils of communism, how it's undemocratic, but then not practice the same thing at home. And a lot of people were upset about the fact that just the dirty laundry of the US was aired publicly to the world. But it was a way to put pressure on the US to do what it was supposed to do. So as you know, a friend of mine always says, you know, sunlight is the best disinfectant. That sometimes, you know, these things need to be made known so people can understand what's going on. It allows people to understand that they're not alone, but also allows other people to understand, you know, what other struggles people are going through. And there's actually been a significant amount of study which has shown that the kind of lack of empathy on the part of whites towards the struggle of blacks is that they are unfamiliar with Black history. They're unfamiliar with what blacks are going through. And so a lot of people are saying, well, I never do this. Like, this is brand new to me. And Black people will be saying, no, we've been telling you this. I think social media is a way of documenting this so they can't hide it. And I think the videotapes, the Facebook Live stuff is like, no, we can't relay the story of what happened to George Floyd to you, because you can see it in a whole bunch of different ways. We need to show you the actual image of what happened and show you the number of minutes the officer sat there with his knee on his neck and smile. You need to see that to fully understand what's going on. And I think the advancement in social media have made the visceral feelings that African Americans feel when they see these things become that whites are now sharing. So they're seeing like, oh my God, this is what you all go through. And just like we talk about the Me Too movement, where people can visualize this, see this, that they can understand the context and not get things mixed up. And I think social media is helpful in that way. But as my colleagues have pointed out, social media is not the cure-all. It's a tool within a massive toolbox, and you need to use it properly. But it is an important tool that needs to be used properly.
It's a great way for us to end, although I'd love to hear more thoughts on the topic that we've been able to share today. Thank you so much, Dr. McDaniel and Dr. Makalani and Ms. Coleman-Mortley, for sharing your time and wisdom with us. To continue our theme of protests, politics, and power, I'm going to open the mic to Cometry, André Bradford. Remember that while you can, in the chat, feel free to snap, to clap, and share the love so that we know how you're reacting. Thank you so much. And I'll give the mic literally to Cometry.
Thank you, Heather. Can you guys hear me okay? Just want to make sure. Hold on. Good on hearing? On audio? Okay, awesome. Hello everyone. Hi, Civic Saturday. My name is André. I go by SC Says. I'm a slam poet coming to y'all from Austin, Texas, the breakfast taco capital of the world. You can literally Google that. For those of you a little bit less familiar, slam poetry is usually a very interactive art form. So during our sessions, you're going to hear some slam poems, surprise. And during those poems, if you hear something that really resonates with you, that connects with you, hits you somewhere in this general area, you can snap, you can clap, you can throw up comments in the chat there. That feeds us energy. We love that. So like I said, I'm in Austin. And in Austin, we have a motto, which is keep Austin weird. Now, I'm already pretty weird. I am a Jamaican and Mexican. I am a Jamexican. I may be the only one you ever meet in your life, so savor this moment. I grew up in a non-culturally diverse neighborhood in Grand Prairie, Texas. That is the literal name of the town I grew up in. That was weird. I cry at animated movies consistently. I'm not sure if that's weird or there's like a deeper issue there. I'd say that's pretty weird. But what I'm finding really weird right now is that I'm still having to explain what racism is to people. You know, like it's 2020. I figured we would at least understand this at this like basic level by now, but I'm still meeting people or seeing people post online things that like, that's not racist. You're just being sensitive. And like, I'm a poet, you know, words are supposed to be my thing, but I struggle sometimes to find the right words to accurately describe what it's like being a person of color in America today. But I think I finally figured it out. How do you explain a sneeze to someone who's never had one? Well, it's like when you smell something, doesn't want to handle it, so retaliates. Or you ever get an itch in a weird place you couldn't reach, and the more you try to ignore it, the more it itches. So you start to convulse and shake in weird ways until it's satisfied. Dictionary says a sneeze is when you make an involuntary explosion of air through the nose and mouth due to irritation of one's nostrils. But if you've never sneezed before, that doesn't quite capture the unique feeling of the almost painful need to get this shit out of your face. I once sneezed on a stranger. And the look of horror she gave me still haunts me to this day. And like, it wasn't even my fault. I turned to the side to sneeze like a decent human being, and she just happened to speed walk into it. I think we don't have a great way to explain a sneeze because everyone has already experienced it by the time we know the word for it. How do you explain racism to someone who hasn't experienced it? Well, it's like when someone looks at you and presumes to know your story without ever once saying a word to you or listening to you or looking at you. It's like when someone gets an itch in the back of their mind that the skin you're wearing is so 2014 or 1968 or 1861 is worth a retweet, but not equality, is still upset about that whole slavery thing. And the only way to alleviate the itch is to call you boy or thug or target, or to pretend your struggle to survive doesn't exist. And so to help those who haven't experienced it understand just how common this still is, for the duration of this poem, I will replace the word racism with the word sneeze. I was 15 when I experienced sneezing for the first time. I was meeting my girlfriend's parents, and her father looked me in my eyes and said, "I don't want you dating my daughter." He tried to blame it on other people's sneezing, that he was just looking out for our safety. But that's the thing about sneezing. Once you see it, you can always tell when someone's trying hard to hold it in. I used to believe that sneezing was just a thing we read about in textbooks. It can never happen nowadays. So it was a little jarring when someone sneezed in my face, no blessing or apology, just a shrug that said I shouldn't be so charred cedar. So pitch black pollen, so dark brown dust. Since that day, I've watched people sneeze openly and behind closed lips, and I can assure you, no one looks appealing when they're sneezing. Looks honorable with both eyes closed, and we seem to made it respectable to sneeze behind the same hands that shake our own, assuring us there's no sneezing problem. Like, for people of color, it is an allergy season all year round. Like, this country can just Benadryl its way to equality, as if we weren't the ones struggling to keep breathing drowsy after being prescribed Twitter apologies. Isn't it funny how every sneeze can sound unique, but we all still know when it's happening? Like, we've been speaking sneeze our whole lives, reading it in nationalist napkins or far-right shirt sleeves, claiming sneezing is just a part of our history. Chuckling at all the funny ways people try to stop it from happening, telling us their Civil War monuments aren't about sneezing. That would be silly. No, the monuments embody a cure. Getting rid of all the irritants is the best way to stop all this sneezing, wouldn't it? And in response, we all close our eyes and open our Facebook feeds, choosing an emoticon that shows just how angry we are at all this sneezing, and the world keeps turning. Like, this was all just ordinary. Like, it was as natural as... Thank you. Thank y'all so much. I love the energy. I see the chats. This is great. Thank y'all so much. I love that. So that event actually happened to me when I was in high school. And I would consider myself an optimist for the most part. But not long after that event happened, after I met her father, I got a call from her, and she was bawling. And she said I had to come over and see something. So I went over to her house, and as I'm pulling up, I see on my girlfriend's car written in giant white letters the words "nigger lover." And a lot of emotions went through my body when I saw that. But I felt something inside of me just crack. And I'm in high school, you know, I don't have the words for like self-care and mental health and trauma. Like, I don't understand that stuff yet. So I just carry around this crack with me. When Tamir Rice was killed, I cracked again. When Eric Garner was choked to death, I cracked some more. When Tatiana Jefferson was killed in her home while she was watching her nephew, I splintered more. When Ahmaud Arbery was murdered in broad daylight, I shattered. I completely fell apart. Now, I probably don't have to tell any of you that are on this Zoom call right now that racism is alive and well. It is in the way that our police treat people of color. It is in our politics. It's in our education system. It's in our banking system. And it can feel so daunting to try to fix all of that, to try to make an impact in all of that. And something that's been really encouraging to me lately is that this is still a talking point right now. After George Floyd's death, there are still protests happening. We're still having these conversations like this. I was at a protest at the Capitol here in Austin, put on by Houston Tillotson, a historically Black college here. And I will never forget this image. I was standing on 7th and Congress, and I'm looking down the street. And as far as my eye can see are people. Thousands and thousands of people from all different walks of life coming together to show their solidarity, show their support, to voice their anger, their frustration, to demand justice. That was powerful. That was so meaningful to me as a person of color to see so many people come together in support of that. Something else that's been really encouraging to me is after George Floyd was killed, a lot of major corporations put out public statements showing their support for Black Lives Matter. You know, companies like Apple, like Google, like Microsoft put out these public statements that they were going to be putting money towards Black lives, Black art, Black businesses. Now, this is long overdue, and it's not enough. We should be demanding that their C-level boards represent the diversity they claim to support, but it is a step in the right direction. And as a person of color, you know, when I'm getting these emails, that matters to me. That helps me feel seen. Like I don't have to carry these burdens on my own. Also, quick shout out to Ben and Jerry's. Their statement on Black Lives Matter is it's choice. If you haven't read that, go read that after this call. It is amazing. It is absolutely what our company should be doing. Also, the memes for that are fantastic. You should check that out. But something else that's been really encouraging to me in all of this is after George Floyd was killed, I started getting these text messages from people, from friends all over the country. Some people that I hadn't talked to in years sent me a text saying, hey, I'm really sorry for what is going on in our country right now. And I want you to know that I love you, that I support you, that I see you, and I'm curious what I can do to help. And I've never really considered that that might be something that I needed or wanted. But as these texts started to pour in from totally different people, and totally different spaces and totally different backgrounds, I felt seen in a way that I haven't since I saw that writing on my girlfriend's car. I felt valued in a way that I don't when I look at the news and I see what our president is saying or not saying about racism. That mattered to me. Also, if that's something that you haven't done, I would highly recommend shooting a text message really quick after this, just saying, hey, I see you. You have no idea how much that can matter. Now, a big reason that we are having this conversation right now is to keep this momentum alive. And at Cometry, what we do is we try to blend artistry with message. You know, we want you to not only understand why these things are important, but to feel them, which is why I shared my sneezing poem with y'all. I want you to understand that this is a human level. It's not just the big ideas of racism. Like, this matters on a human level. Humans are being killed in broad daylight. Humans are being marginalized. And we, as a culture, society, country, have to come together and support and to try to change that. And so what I'm so grateful for of the Civic Saturday is that you all are engaging in this conversation. That matters. That's huge. It's so comforting to scroll through and see so many people talking about this, supporting this, having really deep conversations, having great questions about this. And it's not just for Black Lives Matter. We have to do this for any marginalized group, be it LGBTQ, be it women, believing women, empowering women. We have to come in support of any marginalized group. But what I really want to implore you to do, and what I want to ask you to do, is to remember how angry, frustrated, hurt, and upset you felt when you heard about George Floyd or you watched that video. Not just so that you can dwell on those emotions, but so that you can remember that this was a human being whose life was taken. Like, these matters, they boil down to human beings not being able to live their lives the way that our country has promised them. Remember that. That's why these conversations matter. We're going to be having a social read after this, where Cometry will be facilitating some actual dialogue, and we'll be talking about these issues in real talk. And we want to encourage you to come through for that after this. But I just want to say thank you all so much. Thank you, Civic Saturday, for hosting us, and thank you all for just listening to some of my story and for being there in support of Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, André. That was I can't talk about it or I'll cry, but that's exactly why we're having these conversations. And this is a great segue to getting civically active because our emotions are there. So let's hear from our student guests.
Hi there. Good early afternoon, everyone. My name is Cole Wilson, a staff member at the Annette Strauss Institute, and I'm going to be asking some questions of recent graduate Kenard Jones and current rising senior Liz Kofur. As a brief introduction to our speakers, Liz, as I mentioned, is a rising senior at UT Austin. She's enrolled both the College of Liberal Arts and the Macomb School of Business. She's currently an intern at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. An undergraduate writing consultant at UT. She's a member of the executive board at the African Students Organization at UT. She's also a member of the Macomb's Leadership Program, Black Policy and Leadership Council, Onyx Honor Society, and Terry's Scholars Association. Liz works to fight food insecurity, make sure students have access to affordable healthcare, and lobby the legislature here in the great state of Texas. Kenard Jones, who will be joining Liz, is a native of Houston. He is a recent graduate of Texas Southern University in the city of Houston, former president of the Texas Southern Baptist Student Ministry, former associate justice for the Student Government Association at TSU, vice president of the Political Science Organization at TSU, a board member of Young Invincible's National Advisory Board. He's worked with Councilmember Boykin, worked under Mayor Sylvester Turner. He's worked for President Barack Obama's Organizing for Action nonprofit. He's worked at BP, founded his own political consulting firm, his own scholarship foundation, and his own voting rights defense organization. Kenard was named student regent for TSU in 2018 by Governor Greg Abbott, and is currently working in political communications and government relations. While I gave y'all's on paper biographies, Liz, I'd love for you to start. Take 5 minutes to talk about the work you're doing, what you've done, what you plan to do, and how it is impacting UT Austin, your community, in whatever way you feel fits the moment.
Definitely. So a little bit of background. I live in the Riverside area of Austin, but I'm originally from the suburb of Arlington, Texas. Upon moving to Austin, I noticed that there was a large displaced population under the bridges in the area. So I started a little community initiative called Feed the Hungry Project that not necessarily addressed the issue, but brought together some students from UT that would organize about once a month to pack some lunches and essential items like hand warmers, body wipes, hand sanitizer, things like that to provide to these individuals in addition to some lunch. That was something that I started about in October, and I invited some student organizations to kind of join in and help with that. But recently, especially given their events, I've always had a passion for the Black community, whether it be on campus with students or just in the area. So I joined an organization called the Onyx Honor Society and started working with the executive board to kind of push initiatives to help Black UT, as we dub them. Recently, I was elected the president of the organization, and some of the ideas that me and the executive board are currently working on are phenomenal and out of this world. Taking that kind of passion for food insecurity, working with one of our community service head to create a student fund that would help students with groceries for the month. In addition to that, we're also working on a mass incarceration project that'll take people's, not unwillingness, but make it a little bit easier for people to put action behind their, words. So instead of just retweeting and posting petition links, how about we organize and write letters to these individuals who are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes, or write emails via templates that are pre-done for you to these individuals to kind of bring more awareness to the issue. In addition to some ideas to increase Black student enrollment at UT, because those of y'all that are there know the population is very, very, very minuscule, and it's been that way for years. So we wanted to bring Black students together to not only encourage Black high schoolers to apply, but also answer any questions, address any concerns they have about Black UT, in addition to helping them with resume reviews, application reviews, college planning, and et cetera. So that's kind of like what we're working on now. And one final thing is through BPLC, we were able to meet with the Dean, VP of Student Affairs, I think her name is Dr. Sansia Lily Regents, and Interim President Hartzell to come up with some demands that the Black population had. And luckily, a couple weeks after our meeting, we saw some of them implemented, and we're still in constant communications, work on the other aspects of the demands that we had. And the final piece of it is I'm working with a DDCE intern who is also a UT senior to create a Black virtual student recruitment event that'll still allow people to learn about UT from like the Black UT perspective while still being like virtual and staying safe and not coming onto campus.
You're incredible. You're an inspiration every day. I wake up to try to be a little bit more like you. You blow my mind. Kenard, I want to pose the same question to you. Work you've done, that you're doing, that you plan to do in the future in regard to the current moment. I know you're working in government relations and you work for transportation equality on TSU campus when you're a student regent. Discuss whatever you think is pertinent in this moment, please.
Oh yeah, of course. Thank you, Cole, again for that great introduction. You know, as you was introducing me, the only thing I could think of, like, wow, how did I have time to do all that? Because now I'm like, Jesus, I can't do that now. I don't know how I slept. But again, thank you all so very much for having me be a part of this great event that you guys are putting on. There's been a lot of great conversations today. And being able to hear from so many great community changers that are out there, it's just, it's a lot of great encouragement, especially during the time that we're living in right now. It's something that is needed to, you know, put fire under all of us to get us out there even more, to continue to do the good work and continue to help and encourage as many people as possible. As Cole mentioned, I'm working currently within the government relations and political realm right now, where my firm is working with a ton of great small businesses around the state of Texas, helping them get connected to not only their local, but also their state political stakeholders as well, helping them champion some of the causes that is near and dear, not only to myself and to my partner, but also to the community as well. You know, one of the things that really got me into the government relations realm was actually working within BP and working within their government relations department, you know, going around and traveling to all the different trade associations that they were a part of. You know, one of the common things I kept noticing as I would go to all these different meetings, there wasn't a bunch of people that looked like me in that room. You know, I found myself as being the only, you know, Black person in every meeting that I walked into. And I thought to myself, you know, man, you know, we need greater representation and a better voice in this area, because, you know, believe it or not, it's the folks who are behind the scenes, who are meeting with those state legislators, who are meeting with those city council members or as mayors, who are actually making the decisions. Not that many, you know, the people are out in front of the camera aren't really making the big decisions. It's the people that are behind the scenes who are having those meetings, who's spending, you know, all this money to take them out to eat and take them to dinner and stuff like that. You know, those are where the decisions being made. And if it's not a lot of people who look like me who's in those meetings, then that means our causes and our community is not being championed. So I said, you know, something has to change, something has to be done. And so stepped out, and we started it up last year, and it's just been an amazing ride, being able to really work with businesses, but also work with the community and bridge that gap and bring it together. Has definitely been an honor of a lifetime. I never could have imagined myself being able to do that. And just to, you know, paint a picture, you know, during my, you know, college years, which is, you know, not too far away. I'm making it sound like I graduated like 3 years ago. But, you know, during my college years, you know, one of the things that was near dear to me that I kept to my heart each and every time that I would get out of bed or I would go out and do something, was that I did not belong here. You know, I'm the first male in my family to graduate high school. I'm the first one in my family to graduate college. And I always woke up with that sense of, you know, looking at my family lineage and looking at the community where I grew up at, where there wasn't much opportunities or many people going to college, it just felt that I wasn't supposed to be there. So because I was blessed with the opportunity to be there, I was going to do whatever I could, not only to leave a lasting legacy, but also to build so that more people behind me, more people who look like me, could also have the same opportunities that I've been afforded through my time as well. That the same people will be able to go to college, same people will be able to start their own business and have that entrepreneur mindset as well. So it's definitely been a great ride. And again, I'm so excited to be able to have this great conversation with you guys.
Thank you, Kenard. That's amazing. And I want to build off what you just touched on with a question to Liz. Kenard, you discussed, where you found inspiration to start some of these journeys and where you found, the drive to put a scholarship fund together for HBCUs, right? Liz, I want to turn that question to you. Where do you find inspiration? Where do you find guidance? Where do you turn when you're working to fight for homeless Austinites? When you're looking to find conduits on UT Austin's campus for Black student representation? How would you tell freshman Liz, this is the game plan, this is the blueprint, this is how you're going to do it?
So my inspiration came from coming out of my comfort zone. Again, I grew up in the suburb of Arlington, and for my last 2 years of high school, I lived in Beaumont. I went to school at Lamar. So looking at the education system in Beaumont compared to Arlington, I noticed that there were stark differences. And I had chalked it up to it being attributed to one thing, but upon further research and luckily scholarship, I enrolled in a certain AFR course within Lamar that kind of opened my eyes to like the different like intersectionality and the equities that come from socioeconomic status, race, things like that. So once I realized that that was an issue and that was one of the roots of the issue, I thought to myself, what can I do as a student to help? Can I write letters to get my point of view? Can I storytell? Can I donate something, So that's where like the inspiration came from when I was aware of the problem and I kind of put myself out of my comfort zone. Whenever I came to UT Austin, I noticed that issue was still present, but in a different form. So while it's a lack of opportunity there for students in Beaumont, Port Arthur, Southeast Texas, over here, it's a lack of student representation due to similar issues as well. So I wasn't the only one that noticed this issue. I wasn't the only one that noticed the problem. I think the work that comes here is voicing that, one, you're concerned, and two, you want to do something about it. Because we can all sit here and say there's an issue, but do you want to put forth an effort to solve this issue? So once you do that, you're able to realize that there are students who have an interest in also solving it. So you get together, you ideate, you brainstorm, and then you connect with different faculty and staff with the position to make these changes or to help you. And that's what we did, luckily, this year with BPLC, where we opened up the conversation to include not only undergraduate students, but Black grads as well, to figure out what can we do, who can we contact, and how can we make these changes.
Amazing, Liz. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I hope that resonates. It certainly resonated with me. I hope it resonates with some folks in the audience right now. Kenard, I'm going to turn a question back to you. And I'm asking this question both out of curiosity, but also as someone who has worked in government relations in the past. And my experience may be different than yours, but to the same point, government relations can sometimes be a bit limiting in terms of where you can make your impact or what voice you can make heard in what space. But you do a very good job at working from a multitude of angles. For the folks in the audience, and I see some names that are working at the Capitol who are working in campaigns, how do you go about continuing to push ideologies and concepts that in your role in government relations, you may not have the opportunity to? In other words, you're 9 to 5, you're not given the opportunity to push an ideology or concept. Is it just a side hustle? Do you just work with scholarship funds? Is it showing up to spaces like this? Is it going to public spaces and making your voice heard and bringing folks with you? How do you go about continuing to push ideologies when they don't match your 9 to 5?
So that's a really good question. The first thing is, definitely, finding time just to participate within community meetings where you're located at. Most community meetings and most, civic meetings occur after work hours, after that 5 p.m. time frame, which is a good time to really get involved and to really do what you can to bring change in your community. Another way is, through weekends as well. I'm not sure how everyone's weekend is set up, but if you find something that you're passionate about, if you find something that you truly care about, that you want to see that change in, then start sacrificing some of your weekends to really put that work in, to really bring about that change and that difference. One of the things that I always tell folks is this: if you see a problem or if you see something that is going wrong in your community, then instead of going around complaining about it and going around saying, oh, that needs to be changed, tweeting about it, maybe, step up and really be that force and do something about it. When we looking back at the Scholarship Foundation that I started actually my freshman year of college, one of the big things that I saw was there was a bunch of my peers who was either having to drop out of college because the cost was just too much and they couldn't afford it, or they had to take on 2 to 3 jobs just to pay their way through college while having to struggle to pay their bills, put food on their table, and keep a roof over their head. And just a side note, if you didn't know, Texas is actually the second highest in the United States with the amount of homeless students. So it was those 2 things that I saw that I was like, we have to do something about it. It's like, what if we created a scholarship to really give something to these students so they can have some sort of leg up and stay here at TSU, stay here in college, get their degree, and go out and do great things like we know they can. And we said, there's no way as young people we can start a scholarship. Who's going to donate to us? But we kind of, got that fear out of our mind, and we said, you know what, we're just going to step out on faith and see what happened. And we went out, we fundraised, we talked to people, and within our first quarter, we were able to raise more than $10,000, and which that went to providing scholarships to more than 10 students within that first quarter, which significantly helped them stay here in college, but also paid off their remaining balance that they had at TSU. So it's change like that can happen if you choose to just step up. The big thing is, if you're doing whatever you can in your community to make sure your community is taken care of, then you won't even have to worry about the craziness that is occurring in Austin or the craziness that is occurring in Washington, D.C., because you know that you and your community is working together and you guys have been insulated from all that craziness because y'all are creating new opportunities for yourselves. That is the key right there. And that's how we can really mobilize and really get some things occurring within our communities, but also within areas that we truly care about as well.
All right, it's hard for me to stop smiling when you're speaking. You're blowing my mind. I love the phrase, get that fear out of our minds. I love that so much. And step out on faith. That's brilliant. Liz, I'm going to turn it back to you. And one reason why I asked Kenard that question specifically is because he is in the Capitol making that change. He is in these spaces where he can really impact legislation. And what you've discussed is being in the grassroots world, right? But I also know for a fact that you've walked through the state capitol with bill flyers in your hand and you've talked to legislators. Could you tell us how you see that change coming about from the way that Kenard discussed his work from government relations translating to grassroots? If you could take that same walk back for us, grassroots to government relations, if you will, Liz. Also not in the prepared questions. I'm going rogue at this point. So Liz, take your time answering that question. I'm so sorry.
You're good, thank you. I think it's a really good question. It's a really good point. It's something, I'm not gonna lie, that I haven't been doing as much as you. I interned with Young Invincibles, which is a nonprofit that is, I think, Kenard, you did you had a Young Youth Advisory Board, so you know what I'm talking about, for 18 to 34-year-olds, right? So through that experience, I was able to better understand the political process, because one thing I reflected upon that I revealed to my boss was, before Young Invincibles, I had no faith in our political system, in our legislature, in laws. I had no faith in it at all. I didn't think that real change came that way. Through that experience, I was able to understand that it is possible, not only through consistent communication with your legislators, but also storytelling. Sometimes, although it's a bad thing, but sometimes our legislators are out of touch with reality. They don't know the issues that are going on. They're not as aware of how big the problem is, and that's an issue. So unfortunately, the reality is, it's part of our responsibility to educate them and let them know that, hey, as a Black student at UT, this is my issue. Here's how you can help. Here's how you can fix it. So one thing that I've really been trying to focus on, that I think Cole actually popped into my head, is how can we organize students and bring them and give them the opportunity to speak to legislators so we can get kind of the issues resolved. For example, one thing that we were really upset about was it a year ago, was the lack of voting locations on campus. We have over 3,000 students in only 2 locations. And whenever I got off of work at 7, I saw like this long line, and it was like just going and going and going. And it's like, some of us don't have time for that. Some of us are discouraged by that. So what can we do, and how can we better voice our frustrations to get change done? Luckily, it worked a little bit, in the sense that we only had 1 at first and they opened the second one, but hopefully we can get more in the coming years. But that's one thing I really wanted to focus on, is bringing student voices to our legislators, to the correct individuals, to better address the issue, as well as let them know that, hey, this is also an avenue to have change, instead of just, Twitter and Snapchats and TikToks.
Spoiler alert, Liz was really good at it too, by the way. Liz, I'm gonna ask you one last question, and then I think we're getting close to out of time. In regard to the current moment, the current climate where we are, it's 2020. Every inequity in America has been brought to the forefront by the pandemic, by the killings of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. Civic activism's at an all-time high, at least in our lifetimes. As a student on the ground leading these charges, where do you see this movement going in your experience? Speaking from the experience that you've had, working in all these different spaces and conduits you've pushed through, do you see its natural conclusion coming somewhere? And where do you see yourself and your community in the mix? That's a big one.
It is, yeah. Okay. All right. So there's parts to it. First and foremost, where do I see the movement going?
Yes.
Second, how do I see, I guess, the student community playing a part in that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or the community you're a part of. Your work at UT, I think, is a brilliant example, and hopefully a shining example of what's to come in other spaces. Do you see that being mimicked, for example, or do you see change continuing to happen on UT Austin's campus? Where do you see this movement as time turns going?
So I think one thing that I'm seeing that's really kind of indicative of the future is, we're kind of shifting a little bit from just conversation to action, right? So we have our words of support, we have our allyship and things like that, but now let's put some action behind it, right? We see the corporations putting out statements, things like that, to increase diversity. Hopefully in the coming years, their C-suite will reflect, more diverse population. But specifically within campus and student organizations, I see that the conversations are still happening, but now it's not me sitting here trying to educate you, but it's other individuals including in the conversation. Like, you're a Black student, how can we help you? For example, whenever the unfortunate passing of George Floyd happened, we found out that the UT administration had reached out to student government. And it's understandable, student government is the representative body of the student population, it's understandable, things like that, but they wanted them to speak on the issue. And it's like, student government is not reflective of the population. We have an organization that is reflective of the Black student population, who is aware of the issues, who can speak for us. So within that, we were able to kind of push the admin's focus to BPLC and bring us into the conversation to where they're able to hear our voices. So now they know if anything ever happens in the Black community, they won't run to SG. They can go to BPLC, vice versa. So then moving on from there, whilst conversations are moving towards action and there's more inclusive voices within the conversations, I also see, I had one more point. Let me see if I can remember it.
If you want, I can turn this over to Kenard, and then you can finish this out.
Okay, yeah, please.
All right,
Yeah.
all right. Kenard, can you take the same question? Would you like me to restate it?
Oh, no, it's good. Thank you. Again, great question. The first thing is, in terms of the movement and in terms of, continuing to get justice, we have to stay in the fight. What do I mean by staying in the fight? We can't give up. We can't give in, and we can't just reduce it to just a hashtag and then forget about it when a new trend comes out 2 weeks from now. We have to keep holding their feet to the fire, because that's the only way the change is going to come. We have to keep on meeting with the legislators, whether it's Congress and DC or state legislators here in Austin. We have to not only meet with them, but also bring about a plan of action, what we want. We have to present to them what we want, not what they will give us, but no, what we want, and this is how we want it. That's how our ancestors did it. When we look back at, the late, great, Congressman John Lewis, during that time, they didn't give in. They kept on fighting. They kept on marching. When they met with legislators, they didn't just raise their voice and yell at them. They actually came to them with tangible change items and said, we want this, we want that, and we want this, and we want it now. And a vote came. We have to do the same exact thing. And another thing that we have to do is we really have to work on, reducing the cynicism that is currently within our democratic state. Democracy within the United States is under attack at this moment. The voting access is under attack at this moment. We are told, especially when you look at young people, the biggest reason why, we're not going out and we're not voting like we should be is because we're not seeing action behind that vote. And that is really hurting a lot of young people, saying, why am I going to vote if nothing is going to change? Why am I going to vote for who's going to be president when apparently that don't matter, because you can only win off of electoral college in this country and not the popular vote. All that plays a role in young people not wanting to go out to vote, young people not wanting to stand in lines. So we have to really work to educate, to let young people know that, your vote counts more than you think it does, not only in the federal level, but also in, more importantly, in the local and state level, even more so. Because when you go out and vote for the judges, your district attorney, the Attorney General of Texas, all that plays a role in justice within the state. You want cops convicted for killing unarmed African Americans, then you need to start voting for the judges who's sitting on the benches. You need to start voting who's going to be in the district attorney's office. That matters. And so all that plays a role where we have to do a better job of just educating and just staying in the fight. If we can stay in the fight and really continue to hold them to their feet to the fire, then that's where change will begin to come. And I'm sorry I went on a rant, but.
No, always amazing, Kenard. There's the quote from this one is, "And then the vote came." That one is a punch in the chest. I love that, Kenard. Thank you. We are out of time, but Liz, I want to turn it back to you for just one brief moment. A final point, if you found it and you want to share it, go for it. If not, you just want to say, thank you so much, and I agree. I'm going to let you go for it.
I think, sorry, I hit space, something popped up, but I think Kenard touched on everything, and I do want to say thank you again for the opportunity and these questions to speak.
thank you guys both. Y'all are unbelievably amazing. You inspire me every day I get out of bed. I appreciate y'all both being here, the work you're doing, the work you will do, and the work you've done. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Heather, and thank you guys again.
Thank you both for your inspiration, for the work that you're doing on the ground, and showcasing how action is what it takes for us to see change. So now that we have some new ideas flowing for our audience, I'm going to hand it back to Cometry.
Awesome. My name is Iggy. I'm the co-founder of Cometry. We'll unpack a little bit of a mental shift here. We're going to speak on mental and emotional health. I'm going to invite André here to share this piece that we'll use to kind of get that ball rolling. Traffic signs kind of suck. Usually only seen after it's too late to do anything about. Warning, major construction 1,000 feet ahead. Yeah, after I spent the last 2 hours sitting in traffic due to said construction. Or that one random deer sign that looks way more like an advertisement for majestic deer. Then watch out, majestic deer may decide your car needs a new body kit. Or that sign that just says bump, not slow down, bumps ahead. Not on level road ahead, proceed with caution, just bump. By the time you figure out what bump means, you're airborne thinking, I just had my wheel alignment done. These signs can be incredibly unhelpful. But some signs, if gone unnoticed, can be life-threatening. I remember staring at my steering wheel. Signs are only useful before they're needed. Hands at 10 and too far gone. Caution, proceed with care, because the concrete I am made of might falter. Wondering at what speed I'd be able to make these memories stop chasing me. Everything has a breaking point. As I repeated, I can't do this anymore. Pressure can burst pipes. I can't do this anymore. Pressure can bend the strongest resilience. I just can't do this anymore. Pressure can squeeze a diamond out of cold dust or create a black hole. Impressions of pain are usually written on warning signs no one else can read. Tears racing down my cheeks as giving up living raced through my mind. And windshield wipers could only do so much in a hurricane. I wouldn't want you to know anyway. So I told my story to things I wouldn't ask questions. To dirty floor mats. To an empty parking lot. To no one or someone who would take my confessional as a comedy routine. What they don't tell you about depression is that most of us won't call it that. So deal with it by pretending it isn't eroding you away. Warning signs sometimes look like, I'm okay. I'm not okay. Just tired. I've been crying myself to sleep. It's been busy lately. I keep my feet moving so my pain won't catch up to me. Because when my mind idles, I will stall out. Emotions, flooding engines, preventing me from changing gears. And I cannot be inconvenienced to anyone else. So I compartmentalize my pain. Throwing the pieces of me I don't want you to see under my backseat pleasantries of I'm fine. Taking a one-way trip to gone. I'm trying to outrun the old model of me. Afraid to look in the rearview mirror, fearing I won't see happiness again. What they don't tell you about depression is that it follows you. And I drove halfway across the country. Left blinker flashing, and I'm unaware of it. To find my depression waiting for me. Just drive, Iggy. Ignore the flashing maintenance signs. Drive to a city with so many people. You can't help feeling lonely. I was alone in a clown car of an apartment, staring at a bottle of codeine like if I could just get to the bottom of it, I'd find peace, so I downed it. All exhaling as it started numbing the pieces of me full of broken edges. Living was more than I could cope with, so I decided to see what death was like. But as my will finally broke, my body refused to let me go. I lived on accident until I began to do it on purpose. Bear with me. Bear witness at the time I spent 8 months living in my car. When your closet is the trunk of a blue Oldsmobile, every road has a fork full of fear. I am empty. I am the wrong turn down a dead end. I cry at night, but only after the parking brake is put on, startled every time headlights flash in my direction. Wake up to recall how inadequate I am. I tell no one. Don't get scared, Iggy. Tomorrow, you'll find a better place to park, a better place to break down. What they don't tell you about depression is that it never fully goes away.
You just learn to read the signs.
You learn to fight back.
By recognizing when it's trying to drive from the passenger
You learn to put your seatbelt on.
By telling friends, I've been thinking about crashing
By
lately.
saying I'm not fine, and that's okay.
By reminding yourself that even though it is a part of you,
you are not your depression. You are not your depression.
You are not depression. It is just a part of you.
And you know how to read the warning signs now. Thank you guys. I really, really appreciate the energy we received there. If it wasn't apparent, that was a pretty low time for both André and I. For him, it was during a recent breakup. And for me, it was when I was homeless in high school. And when I was in that scenario, that situation, I can remember I had a gamut of emotions. I was heartbroken. I was angry. I was sad. I was embarrassed. Like nobody knew about my story. Nobody knew that I was homeless because I was so shameful about it. And that shame just bred loneliness or isolation, and that brought sadness, and it goes on and on. And I think that is what we are all kind of relating to or feeling now during these quarantine and pandemic times. I think these emotions that I felt in that car are very similar to the emotions I'm experiencing during quarantine. And what I want to understand is to give you guys this idea that it's okay to feel these feelings, but what's not okay is if you don't share them. I remember when my buddy approached my car, he's like, hey, I noticed you moved. And I made some lie up. He's like, where are you staying now? And I was like, I don't know. And then he noticed the car had a lot of cartons in the back and food and containers and clothes. And he said, dude, are you living in your car? Dude, tell me you're not living in the car, are you? And that was what was imperative, that he asked me directly. And for the first time, I was forced to sit in my sadness. I was forced to feel what Iggy was feeling. I was given a breath of fresh air. I didn't know how relieving it would be just to say, thank you for recognizing that. I was taking the first step in asking for help. And I think that's very imperative, especially if you want to be advocates, because I don't think you can be an advocate if you can't take care of yourself. At Cometry, we have this acronym called emoji, and the O stands for observe, which is to observe the warning signs that you have mentally and emotionally. There's a lot of differences between individuals. So we implore you to train yourself to learn about the triggers you have. And I think that's really important right now, is to learn the triggers, the neglects that you have for yourself. One great way of doing this is to ask yourself this: is what I'm doing right now serving me? Is what I'm doing right now aiding me to my goals and aspirations? And if so, keep it. If not, change it. Because you need to constantly keep probing yourself, vibe checking, figuring out, or training yourself to understand your triggers. Because the sooner you nip it in the butt, the happier and healthier you'll be. And I'll end with this one final thought. I get it. I'm a very social person. I like to be out and about. I want to interact. I want to reach out to friends. It feels like I'm creating some sort of stress on them just by asking them to hang out, because I do have friends who are very COVID conscious, meaning they're the ones who are very, very alarmed or aware or concerned. There's a lot of unknowns. We don't know if we're going back to school the old version way. We don't know if we got our jobs back. We don't know if we're going to be working or paid. There's so many unknowns. I get all the mixed feelings about this current pandemic. So I think my worry is asking someone, because if I know I ask that person who's COVID conscious, they're going to feel guilty because they're going to decline it. And then I'm going to feel guilty because I put that on them or became this burden. But guess what? Just by sharing that emotion with my friend brought us even closer together. We were able to understand that, okay, thank you for recognizing that. And I can respect that. And when things get back to normal, when you're comfortable, we can go back to normal as we used to. And I think that's what we need to encourage,
It's to express those feelings, to not suppress them, because the more we do, the tougher a situation gets. Silence is so destructive. Share it, even if it's difficult. So at Cometry, we like to actually help people practice before we leave the environment. So right now, I'm gonna ask you guys to repeat after me. It's gonna be a mantra that I typically like to share with students or people, just because it's a great way to kind of get you looking at self or feeling self. So if you don't mind, repeat after me. Sometimes I'm not okay. Sometimes I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And that's okay. Thank you. I appreciate you guys practicing feeling yourselves. Some of y'all might have cringed there. Some of y'all might have felt expansive. Some of y'all might have felt contractive. But that's a great way to start feeling you, listening to you, hearing you. I implore you to do that. I invite you to join us afterwards. We're going to have a workshop or some kind of informal dialogue around race, and we'll dive into more of what's going on with the times, especially with the protesting, etc. My name is Iggy Mwela. Information will probably be posted on links here, but if not, it's at cometry.org, cometry.org. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you again to Cometry for finishing us out on a note of, you know, in order for us to take care of everyone else, we have to take care of ourselves first. So don't forget to stick around for the Civic Social. We'll put a link in the chat so that we can see each other on video. And that will be with Iggy and André. So finally, I'd like to turn it over to Bianca Solis, my fellow Straussian, to lead you in some final thoughts. Bianca.
Right. Okay. So hello everyone. My name is Bianca Solis, and I am the Program Outreach Coordinator at the Annette Strauss Institute. I want to thank everyone for joining us at our first Civic Saturday. Special thanks to all of our speakers who have joined us throughout the day. We are inspired by your passion, your wisdom, and your vision. Thank you for sharing your Saturday with us. It certainly feels like things are pretty shocking right now. There seems to have been like a cycle of collective and overlapping crises. We've all intertwined and intensified by the coronavirus. But in the face of these challenges, we've also seen an emergence of a social awakening and extraordinary political engagement. This mobilizing force, a sense of urgency for us to come together to tangibly contribute our time, our talents, and our skills to figuring out how to best respond to urgent community needs. There's no simple solution to what we're facing, but I do know it will require sustained engagement, one that doesn't begin at one point and end at another. My hope is that events such as these will continue to drive these conversations forward, to bring together diverse groups of organizers, thought leaders, and student activists with the goal of building understanding, sharing community resources, and spurring effective civic action. So while this moment can be unsettling and, in all honesty, sometimes exhausting and overwhelming, what we know from history is that it is how we respond to these types of crises, this culmination of protest, policy, and power that can catalyze transformative change. With this sense of the future in mind, this is a time to get organized, discover strengths and resolve, to push forward for growth and progress. So ask more questions, engage in the harder conversations, make your voice heard, and look who's doing the work, who's done the work in the past, and learn from them. Offer to help, hone your civic skills, and enhance your engagement. I hope that this will inspire all of us to adapt, to evolve, and to actively take part in moving our communities forward. With that being said, we will be transitioning to our Civic Social for the next hour. We'll have the opportunity to engage in more personal and informal discussion on today's topics. It will be led by Cometry's founders, André and Iggy. The link should be provided in the chat. Please note that there is a corresponding password, and so we hope that you will join us for that. We're also scheduled to have another Civic Saturday in October, potentially October 10th, and we will be sharing those details later this fall. thank you again, everyone, for joining us and sharing this Saturday with us. We look forward to continuing this discussion in the future. Thank you all.